Welcome, marketers. Welcome back to Marketing Principles. We are going to talk about chapter 4 today, which is on marketing research. I hope you've had just a fantastic week. I'm really excited about this chapter. One of the things I love about marketing in general is that everyone who lands in this class, whether you are a marketing major or not, has personal experience with marketing. And everyone in this class has personal experience with marketing research. It surrounds us and then we see the results of it every day. But a lot of times we don't even realize it. So how often have you read a headline of an article? A lot of you, if you're like me, you get alerts on your phone of different news articles. For some reason, Google likes to keep me apprised of what's going on in the world. And they just pop up all the time. A lot of us have an app that comes automatically on our phone that gives us the news and so on and so forth. And a lot of times those headlines, embedded in those headlines, are the results of marketing research, or are they? So I want to start with this. How often have you read one of those headlines and then that was it? You read the headline, whatever the headline said, that was all you got out of the article, because quite frankly, it was just too long, didn't read. How often did you read that headline and that was all you read? And then later you told someone else about whatever it was. But the only information you had was the headline, maybe 10 words max, right? So let's look at this headline. Study: teens exposed to more junk food ads eat more junk food. The largest study of its kind found teens who were exposed to more junk food advertising consumed more unhealthy meals each week. So perhaps that's all I read. Think about, if this is all we read, what your conclusion would be. Now, let's assume that you made a little bit further into an article. Here's a different one, same basic topic. Right here, kind of the first paragraph of the article, a different article that I found. And in this case, we have the World Cancer Research Fund. At the bottom of the article, it says this: citing previous research, the WCRF noted that watching 4.4 minutes of food advertising can lead to children eating 60 additional calories per day, and eating as little as 46 extra calories each day can lead to excess weight in children. So I want to leave you with these as we get into the chapter, and then we're going to come back to them at the end. And we're going to look at we're going to dig a little bit further into these headlines, these articles, and see kind of what they actually say. Because one of the things that we find with headlines and just brief little snippets of articles is that a lot of times they don't tell us the whole story. So our chapter objectives are to understand the concept of consumer insights and the role that it plays in making good marketing decisions for companies, and to also understand briefly the market research process. And then my personal objective for you, especially knowing that a lot of the students in this class are not marketing majors. You're not going to go on and have an entire class on marketing research and dig into this market research process in great depth and detail. But this may be the only marketing class that you have. And so I hope that this chapter would sort of open your eyes to the idea that we need to look further into headlines that we see, especially those that claim that something causes consumers to do something. What we're going to talk about in a little bit is that very rarely do we have research that actually concludes any kind of causation at all. And so I hope that you leave this chapter and this class with a healthy dose of caution and just the desire to learn more when you see those headlines come across on your phone every day. So we're going to walk through the market research process relatively briefly. Why do we care about market research? Really, the idea here is knowledge is power. We talked about the 4 Ps: product, price, promotion, place. Okay. We talked about that overarching P of people. And in order to really understand our target market, the P of people, and then to figure out how to position our products, how to get people to think of them in a certain way, and to develop appropriate 4Ps, the marketing mix that is appropriate for the target market, we have to understand the target market. It is not enough to say, I'm targeting college students, and then just assume that we know everything about college students because one time we were a college student. It is important to dig deeper into those markets and figure out and help us understand, truly understand what their motivations are, what their rationales are, what criteria are important to them in selecting certain products, what types of stores do they prefer, what kinds of advertising do they prefer. We have the ability on things like Facebook to actually test 2 different ads for a relatively inexpensive price and do some applicable market research, applied market research with real consumers, with our actual target market, and see, for example, do more people click on the ad that has a pink background, or do more people click on the ad that has an orange background? So we can be really, really detailed like that, or we can look at more intangibles like motivations and opinions. But it's really important to understand our target markets. What we really see is that market research comes from sort of 2 different places. We have firms who want market research. They either do it themselves or they hire someone to do it, or maybe they purchase some research for a company that's all they do is conduct different market research studies and then sell them. And then we also have market research being done in academia all around the country at universities, trying to understand customers, strategies that companies take, sales tactics, all kinds of things that are not specific to one firm's objectives. So here's just a quick example of some market research that was conducted by McKinsey. They have a lot of really great resources that you can find about different strategies, all kinds of excellent business data that they have access, that they report on. And so I thought this one was interesting because it's about you. It's about Gen Zers. And this was a report from last year about Gen Zers. And this small part of the report was just about being different than millennials. And so I thought this was really interesting. And how did they get to this data? Well, they actually went and surveyed people within the Gen Z generation. And so that's where this data comes from, is surveying probably at least 1,000 Gen Zers to figure out what, on average, a Gen Z consumer is like. So what is market research? It is the process of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting data, generally about customers, but also sometimes about rivals and the business environment that we're operating in. We have 7 steps in the process. We start by defining the research problem. This is really important. This is like setting a goal, a business objective, or setting a goal for yourself. If we don't know clearly what it is we're trying to figure out, we could spend a lot of money and time collecting data and still not have the answer to our problem. And then we're going to determine the research design. So we're going to briefly talk about the 3 major types of data that or research that we might conduct where we're collecting data ourselves. And then also briefly discuss secondary data where we're not collecting it ourselves, we're getting it from somewhere else. Then we're going to figure out how to collect the data. And there's a variety of different ways we're going to touch on briefly. We're going to design the sample. So this is figuring out who to collect the data from. Then we go when we actually do the data collection. Then we have to analyze and interpret the data, which involves a lot of statistical analyses, some specialized software to do that. And then we utilize the data analysis to then interpret the data and make recommendations in that research report about here is our problem. Now we've collected data and analyzed it that will help us solve the problem. And based on that, this is what we recommend for solving the problem. So again, defining the research problem is a really critical step. It's really important to be very clear about what we're trying to solve. What questions are we trying to answer? We might also want to identify the who at this point. We're going to get more specific to that later. One of our problems might actually just be better understanding the consumer population, right? What are their characteristics in terms of demographics, in terms of opinions, in terms of different behaviors that may be similar among everyone in the group. And then we also may want to conduct research, or our research problem may be regarding the environmental context. So what types of factors in our internal and external environment could influence our situation? And we want to go collect data to better understand that. Once we have determined the research design now, or determine the research problem, we're going to determine how we have to figure out the research design. So we could conduct secondary data. We also could collect primary data. Secondary data is going to be data that already exists. This could be data that we collected previously. This could be data from different databases that we may maintain about customers. So for example, we're going to talk about this in the next chapter a little bit, but major companies, especially, and with the advances in technology, major companies are able to track a lot of our behaviors, both online and in stores. And so they have a vast amount of data on customers and then can go in and utilize that data for market research purposes. This could be different data we've collected from customers that may be called into to customer service. We could also have external sources of secondary data. Trade organizations publish different reports periodically. Academic research will be published research, so stuff coming out of colleges, government sources like the census data, and then syndicated research. And these are firms or paid research, firms that their whole sole purpose is to collect data to do market research in a variety of different ways. And I'm going to show you several examples in a little bit of syndicated research. Then we have our primary research. So primary research is going to be us actually going out and talking to consumers. We have three major types: exploratory, descriptive, and causal. So exploratory research is generally used if we don't have a good grasp on what our research problem is, and we want to explore that a little bit more before investing more money in the other two types of research design. And this is also great for identifying new opportunities with customers. This can also be great for just starting to understand underlying motivations, because this is generally qualitative in nature. What does that mean? It means that the data is all words. It is not numbers. There's no quantitative analysis. There are no calculations. We are collecting words. So a lot of times this is in terms of focus groups. So a group of maybe 8 to 10 people sit in a room with a moderator, and they're asked different questions, and then they are allowed to converse amongst each other. We also have case studies and ethnographies here. Ethnographies are really interesting. This is where the researcher goes and sort of immerses themselves in whatever situation it is that they're trying to research. There's a researcher in Pennsylvania who does a lot of work with the homeless in terms of market research and understanding sort of the underground markets that exist. And so he actually went and hung out in the homeless community regularly so that they got to know him, and he was just sort of part of the group. and then was able to do a lot of observational collection of data and understanding. And then we just have regular depth interviews, one-on-one interviews, where we are asking not just standardized questions, but a few standardized questions, and then just drawing on what the interviewee says to better understand where they're at, what they are, how they process things, what their motivations for purchases are, or for media choices are, so on and so forth. One of my favorite, what I think is just a really fascinating type of research is, this is sort of qualitative in nature. This is generally exploratory. We sometimes call it trace research, but it's called garbology. And this is where researchers will actually go and study people's trash. So if you think about your own trash can, if you went and pulled up your trash right now, think about all the different things that a researcher might be able to tell about you based on your trash. They would probably be able to tell brand loyalty, maybe the size of your household, how healthy are you even, or based on what types of food you eat. Do you care about the environment or not? Do you have kids or not? How old the kids are? I mean, all kinds of things that we could really figure out just by looking at people's garbage. Descriptive research is a more systematic investigation. This is numbers-based. Usually this is in the format of a survey. And if you think about a lot of different surveys that you might have done in your life, if there is a question that says, select how much you agree with this statement, from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and there's sort of a 5-point scale, that's generally descriptive research. This is probably the most popular kind of research, the most common kind of research that we see is this descriptive survey-based research. Causal research is where we're attempting to identify cause and effect. I mentioned before that it is very rare for us to be able to conclude that we've actually found the cause of something. And that's because it is so hard to control for all of the other possible influences on whatever the effect is. So this is kind of like your basic biology class, where you would have an experiment with an independent variable and a dependent variable. So perhaps the independent variable is which advertisement you saw. Did you see the advertisement that was animated with upbeat music, or did you see the ad that was live action, real person with slower music? And then maybe the dependent variable, the thing that depends on, is how much you purchased at the grocery store that day, total spend, or maybe it's based on, did you buy the brand that you saw in the advertisement? Okay. So just to make the point again, if you remember nothing else about causal research, it's really important to know that even with causal research, it's rare to make an actual conclusive result, because it is just impossible for the most part to have enough control over what's going on in the experiment. Right? Perhaps we had this, there's the advertisement. Some people saw one advertisement, some people saw the other one, and then they went into a fake grocery store and a little mock grocery store, and they then measured, how long it took them to do something, or whatever the dependent variable is. Think about all the other things that could be going on. Maybe their kid is sick and that impacts their decision making. Maybe it's too cold in there for them and that impacts their decision making. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they didn't like something else about the advertisement that had nothing to do with what you were trying to figure out. So there are all kinds of things that could cause the dependent variable to, other than what we wanted it to be other than independent variable. So quick little example here. Sales of beer and diapers are correlated. They're related. When on average, when more beer is sold, more diapers are sold. Does one of them cause the other? Just let you think about that. Next step, choose the method to collect the primary data. So I mentioned our descriptive research is most often survey research. Observational research is not always, but oftentimes exploratory. And then using technology has been a really made a lot of difference in all the different things we can do. Things like neuromarketing or attaching different electrodes to people's heads to see brain scans when they're viewing different advertisements, or we have these software and cameras that will track your eyes. And so you can show consumers an advertisement or some other stimulus and see, what do they look at first? What do they look at for the longest? What do they look at and then look quickly away because maybe they didn't like it? And so we can get some really interesting data from these new technologies. So our survey methods, lots of different ways we can do this. The most common at this point are online questionnaires. There's all kinds of actual companies that go solicit or recruit people to be on different panels. And those people get paid in points, and then they can redeem them for like prizes and stuff. And so you can actually get access to a lot of potential respondents very quickly if you have the money. There are lots of pros and cons to each different kind. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can go back and look at these on the slides. They're a great way to study. And then we need to design the sample. So this is, who are we going to collect data from? So generally this is going to be the people in our target market, or maybe we're looking at the population as a whole. And we need to decide whether our personal judgment is going to go into selecting the respondents. It is a better study. We will have more reliable data if people are more randomly selected. In other words, here's our target population. Does everyone have an equal chance of being included? One simple way to do this, well, used to be simple, was to take a phone book of a town and say, call every third person in the phone book, or call every 10th person in the phone book. So everyone in the phone book had an equal chance of being selected. Then we actually collect the data. And here we are trying to make sure that people actually respond to the survey. If we send it to, however we send it to them, if we are gathering data in foreign countries, language is a huge issue. Making sure that things are translated correctly and so that they're interpreted correctly is really important. And then of course we have to analyze the data and interpret it. We are not going to get into the details of that, but there's a variety of statistical software and statistical analyses that we can utilize for this. So I wanted to leave you with just a few examples. This is some syndicated data from Nielsen that just anyone can access online. They have a variety of paid options as well. But this is just from this week. What were the most popular original shows on streaming networks? Okay. Here's another one that digs more into demographical data. So among people who have a same gender spouse or partner, what was the most popular show on cable? The top 10 most popular shows on cable. Here's another one from Nielsen on Twitch fans. So this is not just demographic data, but looking at, can they recall sponsors within the within esports? How long have they been following? Do they engage with different personalities, and so on and so forth? I thought this one was really interesting. There's tons of really interesting stuff out there. I had a really hard time selecting what to even include on here. But I've been really into podcasts lately, so I thought this one was kind of interesting. They had a whole report on podcast listeners so they looked at gender, what types of what genres of podcasts do men and women listen to. You can see that a lot of them have very disparate percentages, and some are very similar. They even look at household income of different genres. I actually thought was really interesting. They looked at different racial groups and what the top genres were for different racial groups. And then, why do we care? Because that's a really important question. What is the point of having all this data? Why would we care what is the most popular podcast genre among Hispanic consumers? Well, if our target consumers are Hispanic families or Hispanic women, for example, it would be helpful to know that the most popular genre of podcasts is within kids and family. It would make much more sense to be a sponsor or purchase advertising in that genre than it would in a genre that's not on this top 5 list. Okay. We might also combine that with this one here with the percentages of women listeners. So if our target market is Hispanic women, the kids and family genre is the way to go, right? So do podcast listeners actually do anything based on the sponsors, the ads that they hear? And so here they split it into light and heavy users, but you can see here for people who are big fans of podcasts, that 62% of them, so they visited a website for more information. And so you are actually seeing some results, some tangible results from being a sponsor or having an ad on a podcast. So now we're going to go back here. This has been just a really quick dive into market research. That is a much broader topic. There are actual graduate degrees that are specific to market research. So this is a really surface level, broad view of market research, talking quickly about that market research process and just kind of trying to highlight the most important points there. And looking at a few examples of market research that are out there that are interesting. Again, all kinds of really interesting things out there. If you are familiar with, we're going to talk about big data in the next chapter. So I'm going to wait on that comment. So let's go back to this. So when we looked at this a minute ago, it said that this previous research found that watching 4.4 minutes of food advertising can lead to children eating 60 additional calories a day. Now, the good thing here was that the article included a link to the previous research. So you could actually go and look which one. To see how they collected this data and see if there are other things going on beyond minutes of food advertising. Okay, so I clicked on the link that says previous research, and this is what came up. Do bedroom screen times and the mealtime environment shape different trajectories of child overweight and obesity? So this was a study that looked at about 4,000 children in Scotland, trying to identify things that would impact obesity and being overweight and obese during childhood. And what I found when I briefly reviewed this study was that, in fact, it has nothing, there is no measure in here of how long a child spent watching television or how many minutes of food advertising they saw, or even how many calories they were consuming. So I thought that was really interesting and also quite concerning, because now I have no idea where this statistic or this number of 4.4 minutes leading to 60 calories a day came from. No idea. I clicked on the other link about the 46 extra calories a day. That is an entirely different study. It did find that that was accurate, but that was a completely different study. It had nothing to do with food advertising. A lot of times when we see food advertising as a variable in a study, what they actually were looking at was how long children spent watching TV, and then they use that as a proxy for advertising. But we're going to come back to it. All right, so this was this study that had nothing to do with the actual 4.4 minutes of food advertising, but I did think the results were really interesting. These were the results. What they found was that early increases in bedroom screen access, so the earlier that kids get a TV in their room, as well as an informal meal setting, which could be watching TV while eating, not eating in a dining room or not sitting at the table, were the two things that primarily impacted children being in an obese category or versus a non-obese category. Okay, so those are the two things that they found after adjusting for a wide range of other variables. All right, so here's our other headline. Teens exposed to more junk food ads eat more junk food. Okay, well, that seems pretty self-explanatory, right? If you see more advertising, you eat more junk food, it must mean that seeing more advertised junk food ads causes teenagers to eat more junk food. So here was the first little segment of the article. Okay, young people exposed to junk food advertising consume up to 350 more calories every week. According to this study, these teenagers, if they watch one extra advertisement per week about junk food, would eat an additional 350 calories in unhealthy foods every week. Wow, that seems bad, right? One advertisement leads to 18,000. Well, one advertisement per week leads to 18,000 calories in the whole year. That seems like a problem, right? So then I read a little bit further. And then they said, the average teen watches 21 hours of television with ads per week, and a little more than half on streaming services. However, obese teens watch significantly more television, approximately 26 hours, which is the equivalent to one extra ad per week. So what this tells me is that they didn't actually look at how many ads these teenagers were exposed to. They only looked at how many hours of television that happened to have advertisements in it that they watched per week. So does that mean that the advertising caused them to consume more junk food? Or could there possibly be other things at play here? When we use the number of hours per week as a proxy for advertising exposure, we're missing out on a lot of things. Like a lot of people don't pay attention to commercials, or people get up and go to the restroom during commercials or do something else. Or maybe it's simply that watching TV is typically a sedentary sedentary activity. In other words, most likely, these teenagers watching 26 hours of TV per week were sitting down for 5 more hours than the other teenagers. Perhaps there is something to do with being active with the level of activity. I don't know, but I do know that this study doesn't seem to take those things into account. So I'll leave you with that. I really just want you to have a good idea of what to look for when you see those headlines and when you're starting to read those articles, to really actually think about what they're saying and what it means. And a lot of times I have to actually go look up a study the linked study or go look it up somewhere to find what's actually going on. A lot of your normal news reports don't report that. They simply report whatever the result is, or sometimes it's a completely misinterpreted result, not what the authors intended. And so sometimes what we see in the news is not actually what the research is finding. And I think that's just a really interesting thing, and something to be cautious of and aware of. So that's the end of chapter 4. We're going to come back next time for chapter 5, which is on big data. It's a really interesting chapter. Okay, I think they're all interesting, but it's another really interesting chapter. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you on the flip side with chapter 5.